Hello, hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the talk this afternoon on enhancing safety and building resilience in children, youth, and the people around us. This talk is brought to you by the Safe Circle. So, Boys Town is a member of the Safe Circle, which is a collaboration across 7 social service agencies in Singapore that focuses on providing community based mental health services for children and youth. I think perhaps many of you would know Boys Town as a residential home for boys. So indeed, we started off as a residential home to provide shelter for children and youth who have been displaced by World War II. So many years later, we have actually expanded our services to include foster and respite care, youth outreach, outdoor learning programs, as well as counseling and therapy. So to find out more about Boys Town and the services that we offer, I would like to invite all of you to watch this video.
Boys Town helps over 500 children and youth in a year. Founded in 1948 by Brother Vincent, a member of the Montfort Brothers of St. Gabriel, and philanthropist Mr. William McDermott, we first started as a residential home for war-torn children. Now, Boys Town has evolved to become a one-stop children and youth center with an expanded range of services that caters to both boys and girls, from infants to young adults.
I believe passions is the word that I use to describe Boys Town, because all the youth come in with different forms of passions. They all want to do well in life, one way or the other. Likewise for the youth workers and as well as social workers and all our staff. They come in not just for a job, they come in with passion in serving the community, the children, the youth, and family. Being a boy in the 1990s, I believe that the fond memory of Boys Town, and I believe that Boys Town is not just a job, they will come here to work on it every day, as a mission to pursue both personally and also in line with God's purpose.
The residential services caters to youths between ages 10 to 21 who come from socially and economically disadvantaged backgrounds, have experienced traumas and abuse, or face educational or behavioral issues. The youths go through a structured program to instill discipline and mold their characters. Their daily schedule includes interest-based activities in sports, music, and photography. We also have the Boys Town Alternative Schooling for youths who are not in the mainstream education system to continue their studies and to prepare them to return to regular schools. Youth Reach is a street outreach program based in Tampines and Toa Payoh, targeting youth in need who have fallen through the cracks. The youth workers befriend the youths on the streets and engage them in meaningful activities and specialized interventions. The Boys Town Fostering Services provides family-based care for vulnerable children. We run the fostering agency appointed by the Ministry of Social and Family Development, and also Sanctuary Care, a community-based fostering service. The Clinical Intervention Center consists of a dedicated team of psychologists, counselors, and behavioral specialists. We provide a comprehensive range of therapies and clinical support for our residential and fostering clients, their families, and the general public. Boys Town Adventure Center delivers adventure-based programs and therapy to fuel active learning and character development. We also offer challenge courses, camps, and outdoor sports certification for both existing beneficiaries and the public. As we continue the good work of our founders, our mission remains to help children and youth in need become socially integrated, responsible, and contributing members of society.
All right, so once again, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Celine. I am the manager of Clinical Intervention Center, which is the counseling and therapy arm of Boys Town. So in order to support mental health and mental wellness in the community, we take a 3-pronged approach, which is through outreach and education, training and consultation, as well as at the intensive end of the spectrum, we provide therapeutic support and intervention. So because today's talk deals with the topic of trauma, you may find that some of you may find that some of the material presented can be difficult for you to process, and they may bring back memories of painful times in our past. So if you're feeling uncomfortable with any of the content, I would strongly encourage you to take a break at any point, take a step out. If you wish to talk to somebody, you may feel free to approach me or somebody that you trust. Okay, if you have any questions, please feel free to park your questions at the parking lot, okay? Or if not, if you're shy to, speak up, you can park your questions there. If not, you can just, at the end of the session, you may just feel free to ask me if you have any questions, okay? All right. Now, before I start, I would like to take a poll. So I would like to get all of you to just whip out your mobile phones and then scan the QR code here. I would like to get all of you to select the option that best describes your profile, and your learning objective for attending this talk. Okay, thank you all so much for taking the poll. I can see that some of you have actually quite a good understanding of what trauma is and its effects, and then and some of you also work with children and youth here, whereas some of you are here to learn what exactly trauma is. And the rest of you, actually a good majority of you actually have a basic understanding of trauma. All right, so today I'm going to just talk about trauma. How do we enhance safety? How do we build resilience? All right, and how do we through this particular approach called trauma-informed care. Yeah, just wondering, anyone of you heard of trauma-informed care before? Not really. Okay. All right, so first half of the talk today, okay, I will run everybody through, to talk about what is trauma, what do we mean by the trauma event, what is the experience of trauma, and what are the effects of trauma. Okay, I will share about what are some of the signs and responses, signs and symptoms of trauma responses, and then I will touch on the ACE study. So ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. What are adverse childhood experiences, and how do they actually affect adult physical and mental health? All right, and what is the prevalence of trauma amongst children and youth in Singapore? I'll be sharing the Singapore Mental Health Study on trauma prevalence and some articles that have appeared in the media over the past few years. So now, what exactly is trauma? So according to the definition by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration in the US, they have defined trauma as something that results from an event, a series of events or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening and has adverse effects that can be lasting, okay, on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, and emotional or spiritual well-being. So that's quite a long definition that we are seeing here. But to put it simply, trauma is a response to something that is deeply distressing or disturbing. It comes unexpectedly. It usually results from events that are unexpected and sudden, and it has a threat to an individual's physical integrity. Trauma also will overwhelm an individual's ability to be able to cope, all right? And it has a great impact on his or her perception about themselves, the people, and the world around them. So I'd like to bring all of your attention to three words that are underlined in bold, which is event, experience, and effects, and that will form the 3 E's of trauma. So the focus on events, okay, places the cost of the trauma on the environment. Is not the cause of the trauma is never on the individual. Okay, so it's never the individual's fault. Okay, that trauma has occurred. And the focus on experience, all right, highlights the fact that not every child or adult will experience the same event as traumatic because all of us are unique individuals. How we respond to trauma, how we cope with an extremely stressful experience, okay, is dependent on many factors, all right? And lastly, the effects of trauma, the identification of a broad range of the potential effects of trauma highlights the fact that and reminds us that it's not enough to just focus on the signs and symptoms, all right? So we need to take on a more holistic approach when working with somebody who has trauma. Now let's start from the events of trauma. So what are some of the events that can be potentially traumatic? Yeah, so we have events such as death or sudden losses, especially so if the death has been unexpected and very sudden. Okay, so let me just quote an example. I had a primary 2 girl who was referred to me by her grandmother because she witnessed her mom jump down, okay, from their flat unit, okay, and because months have passed, so over weeks and months, okay, the girl has not been able to cope. She kept on having nightmares and actually flashbacks on how mother has jumped down the flat unit. So the death can lead to traumatic grief, especially if it has been unexpected and sudden and under unusual circumstances. So some of us may be familiar with inappropriate touching. All right, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, and neglect. These are interpersonal trauma, which means the trauma takes place between people. All right, fights, either involved or have witnessed. Okay, divorce or separation, especially if the divorce or separation involved domestic violence, spousal violence, or when there's a sudden departure of a parent. Okay, bullying and cyberbullying also count as events that can be potentially traumatic. Okay, I think we are very fortunate in Singapore that we do not experience some of these natural disasters such as floods, tsunamis, earthquakes, tornadoes, but it's important to take note of them. Okay, if some of you may have remembered, a couple of years ago, we have a group of students from Tanjung Katong Primary School actually went to Mount Kinabalu, right, for an excursion. And then while they were there, an earthquake took place. When all the children came back, okay, some of these kids, they, of course, our bodies are actually, it's very amazing. Okay, we can recover following a very scary event. But it takes about 2 to 4 weeks to recover. But beyond that 4 weeks, if the child consistently still has signs and symptoms of trauma, then that is when they may be experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. So some of these kids who had actually post-traumatic stress, some of them actually shared about how they have seen their friends being crushed by the falling boulders. They have also saw their teachers, while trying to shield them, also got crushed by the falling boulders. So these were their narrative, all right? Tsunami, fires, acts of terrorism. 9/11 is one very good example, all right? Building collapse, okay? So we also have other events such as killer litter, near drowning experience, experiencing falls, road traffic accidents, animal attacks, for example, being attacked by a dog or a cat, invasive life-threatening medical experiences. Okay, sometimes patients who have to undergo medical procedures that are well-intentioned and necessary but can be traumatic. So, for example, a diabetic patient, patients with diabetes, if the condition is not being managed well, they do not heal very well from their wounds. So the moment they sustain a wound somewhere and doesn't heal very well, it leads to gangrene. And that is when the doctor have to make the decision to amputate the limb. So procedures like this are very invasive and it can be very traumatic for the patient to be losing a limb, okay? So we also have cancer patients undergoing very extreme treatments like radiotherapy or chemotherapy. Okay, so such medical procedures can be potentially traumatic. Now, the experience of trauma is profoundly affected by how often the trauma has happened, when did it happen, where did it happen, what happened. So when we talk about how often it has happened, so we are referring to a single devastating event versus trauma that has been chronic. Okay, so for example, perhaps a road traffic accident versus someone who has experienced sexual abuse for a duration of time. When we ask the question, when did the trauma happen, we are asking whether the trauma has taken place during childhood or adulthood. Because if it has taken place during childhood, the child may not have the capacity or emotional maturity to be able to make sense of what is happening to him or her. Okay, so it will directly impact on the child's experiences. So when we ask the question, where did it happen? Okay, we are referring to the specific location. So for example, just imagine a 6-year-old child who is being physically abused by his parents. So imagine every day after school, he goes home. He experienced overwhelming feelings of fear and anxiety, not knowing what is going to happen to him when he reaches home. And home is supposed to be a place where it's safe and where we feel safe and secure. So the location of the trauma has a lot to do with the experience. Okay, when we ask the question, what has happened, we are asking, what is the specific event has happened. So once again, road traffic accident versus sexual abuse that has taken place over a prolonged period of time can have very different experiences for the individual. So what I just want to point out is that the same event can be traumatic for one person and not for another. So it does not mean that if, let's say, all of us collectively, we are involved in like an earthquake, all right? So some of us may recover, okay, take 2 to 4 weeks and we'll recover from it. But some of us may not be able to recover beyond that 4 weeks, and we still persistently get a lot of those reactions, flashbacks, nightmares, unable to eat, unable to focus. So all of us are built differently. So therefore, it's important not to assume that if any one of us have been through the same event, this person definitely will have trauma, all right? Okay, now I would like all of you to imagine you have leftover food in the fridge. So the next day you're hungry, you take the food out and you heat it up in the microwave. So you ate the leftover food for lunch. A couple of hours later, you start to have stomach cramps. You go to the toilet, you have diarrhea, and then you start vomiting. So what I'm describing, the stomach cramps, the diarrhea, and the vomiting are actually symptoms of what we call food poisoning. So the food poisoning itself is an abnormal situation for us, right, for our body. However, the symptoms, vomiting, stomach cramp, diarrhea, all these are actually normal for the abnormal situation, which is food poisoning. So similarly, we can also conceptualize the effect of trauma on an individual, okay, as a normal response to an abnormal situation. Okay, the effects of trauma can be short-term and long-term, and sometimes effects of trauma may not be immediately seen. Okay, trauma can also affect an individual's coping responses or ability to engage in relationships. So what do I mean by affecting individuals' coping responses? So for all of us, we all have our own set of coping strategies to deal with our stress. So sometimes when we are stressed, we may talk to a trusted friend, we may confide in our family members, we may go for a run, we may go watch a movie, read a book, watch TV, listening to music. So these are our stress coping responses, right? But when we experience an extremely stressful event, a very unexpected and frightening event, following that, just think about it. Do you think that by reading a book or talking to a friend is going to help us be able to recover very quickly? The answer is no, it's very likely not to. So this is what it means by the effect of trauma can affect our our own coping responses. Trauma can also affect, our physiological responses, psychological well-being, social relationships, and spiritual beliefs. So a lot of the children that I work with who are under child protection, okay, who have been abused, who have experienced interpersonal trauma over a period of time, some of these children, they have their own religious faith. So they very often, when I work with them, they will ask me, if God loved me, why did God let this happen to me? So it actually challenges their spiritual beliefs. I've been a good girl, I've been a good boy, I pray and everything. So why did God let this happen to me? So this is when it will challenge, their beliefs. So now let's talk about what are some of the signs of trauma responses. How does it affect our physical body? How does it affect the way we behave, the way we speak, our actions, and how does it affect us psychologically? So in terms of behavior, blowing up when being corrected, fighting when criticized or teased, happens very frequently amongst children who are victims of bullying. All right. Usually, especially for children, they may resist transition or change. They do not take changes very well. They are not able to adapt as quickly as some other normal children do. They become very protective of their own personal space. This is very, very typical of a lot of children who are being fostered, who are being placed in foster care. So very often when they are first taken out of their natural family and being placed in a foster home with their foster parents, they become very protective of their personal space. This is my things, this is your things, you cannot cross this boundary and so on, okay? They may engage in very reckless or self-destructive behavior. They may frequently seek attention and revert to younger behaviors. So reverting to younger behaviors are sometimes what we call regression. All right. If you remember earlier on, I shared about a case, a primary 2 girl who was referred to me because she saw her mom committed suicide, right? So what actually prompted grandmother to refer, her granddaughter to me was that because the granddaughter was already 8 years old, but she started, following that scary incident that she saw, she started asking to drink milk from a milk bottle. So she has a habit, every night before she goes to bed, she needs to drink a glass of milk. So she used to drink from the cup or the glass, but she started asking for a milk bottle. So even though she had been weaned off since she was 3 or 4, so grandmother was very bewildered. Why was she drinking milk from the milk bottle? But this is a very common sign amongst children who have witnessed or who have been through a very stressful experience, because drinking from the milk bottle gives them a lot of safety and security. All right. Nightmares or problem sleeping. This is almost a very common sign of after going through a very scary experience. Okay, they will have flashbacks, they have problem sleeping, okay, and they have a lot of nightmares. They may become very sensitive to noise or being touched. Happens very frequently for children who have witnessed domestic violence at home, fights among their parents whereby, doors are frequently being slammed, things are being thrown. I also had this child who shared with me that almost every night, because the father borrowed money from the loan shark, right? So the loan sharks will come and start banging on their doors. Okay, touch, sensitive to touch, very common amongst people, the individuals who have been sexually abused. Okay, fear of being separated from family. This happens amongst children who have who will develop separation anxiety following a scary incident, such as road traffic accident. They want to be with their mummies more often. Okay, difficulty trusting others, experiencing overwhelming feelings of sadness, anger, fear. They may also have unexplained medical problems such as headaches, stomach aches, and then when you bring in and see a doctor, the doctor cannot find any underlying medical cause, right? Okay, they may also become very confused over what is safe and what is dangerous. They no longer can tell what is safe and what is dangerous. So which is why in the residential home that I'm working with, when I work with the residential youths, especially for those who have experienced chronic trauma, complex trauma, when they see somebody who looks almost familiar, okay, to their perpetrator. For example, their dad has a mustache, their dad has been the one physically abusing them. When they see somebody close or similar, they may have a meltdown outburst, right? Okay. And they have trouble focusing or concentrating, which is why a lot of the child protection cases that I work with, they generally do not do well in their education or academics, because they're not able to focus, cannot concentrate. They usually do not do their homework because of problems with concentration and focusing. They also have difficulties imagining the future. They tend to have a very negative outlook in life because they are no longer sure what is safe and what is dangerous. Okay, what will be my life be? Will my life ever be back to normal? Will anyone love me again? Especially for those who have experienced interpersonal trauma. So when we meet a person, we cannot see their trauma, we won't know what happened to them, but what we may see are the signs of trauma responses. So if I were to use the analogy of, all of us, we move around, we carry an invisible suitcase with us. So I cannot see what is inside your invisible suitcase, right? But what I can see are the behaviors that you're exhibiting, okay? So now we're just going to talk about our body alarm system, which is also known as the nervous system. Okay, so how does our alarm system work? So maybe let me just share a story. When our alarm system is being triggered, okay, for example, I'm trying to cross a busy road. So when we cross the road, I will look left and right, to see whether there's any oncoming traffic. When I see that the traffic is clear, the road is clear, okay, I'll take a step down from the pavement to the concrete road. Then just as I was going to do that, I saw a car turning into my direction. So my immediate response would be to quickly take a step back onto the pavement because I sense there's danger, right? I need to protect myself. But if you just imagine this, I think a lot of us have experienced this before. This happens very quickly in split seconds without ourselves having any conscious awareness about it. Okay, this is our body's way of protecting ourselves from threat and danger. So maybe I just go through. So when that happens, okay, there's a narrow focus on the threat. The threat will be the turning car, right? Okay, our breathing will speed up and become shallow. We only possess here and now thinking. Okay, maybe just let me explain this a little bit further. How we detect threat and danger is being controlled by this tiny structure inside our lower part of our brain, known as the amygdala. Okay, I will call it the fear center. So the fear center will take in all information, anything that we see, we hear, we sense, we smell, everything, and ask one question: is there danger? So whenever, okay, there is an immediate threat or danger, our fear center will tell us, okay, you need to do certain things, okay, which is take a step back onto the pavement so you can avoid the oncoming car. And when that happens, the fear center actually shuts down the thinking center in our brain. Our thinking center is located in our upper brain just behind our forehead, okay, also known as the prefrontal cortex. So our thinking center is responsible for rational thinking, decision making, planning, and so on. So can you imagine if we see an oncoming car, do you think we have time to plan, oh, okay, there's a car coming, I need to take a step back so I will avoid getting myself knocked down? The answer is no, because when there's immediate threat or danger, the fear center will take over and shuts down your thinking center, so there's no time for us to think. That is our body's or nature's way of protecting ourselves from danger. All right. Our heart rate will increase. So very likely when we take a step back, my heart rate is going to increase. But after realizing that I'm safe, my heart rate will start to decrease. Then blood flows away from gut to muscles because it's preparing for me to run and avoid danger. Okay, so our body alarm system or the nervous system actually goes through a stress and calming response throughout the course of a given day. Okay, when we are healthy, we don't have anything affecting us, our alarm system is able to self-regulate. So for example, I wake up in the morning, I look at the time on my phone, I realize, oh no, I'm late. So I quickly change and I rush out. So I saw the train coming, I quickly rush. I finally caught the train, I sat down, and I feel calmer. Then the moment I reach office, I quickly walk to my desk, I sat down, then I realize, oh, I'm on time. So that's when I finally calm down. So it's self-regulate, right? Or when I'm driving along the highway, then suddenly the car in front of me brakes unexpectedly. I quickly step on the brake, my car stopped. So for a moment, my heart rate will be, very high. But when I realize that I'm safe, it starts to regulate again. So this is how, healthy body alarm system, a healthy nervous system will self-regulate. What actually trauma does, okay, to our body alarm system is that it pushes the activation of the nervous system beyond its ability to be able to regulate. So every time we are able to return to baseline. But when we experience a very scary experience or a traumatic experience, okay, it pushes the system, okay, beyond its capability to return to baseline. So when that happens, our system can get stuck on above the baseline. Okay, that's when we may experience a lot of anxiety, anger, hyperactivity, and fear. Okay, or it can get stuck on off, which is below, the baseline. Okay, that is when we may experience a lot of lethargy, depression, hopelessness. Okay, so this is what is known as the fight, flight, or freeze response to stress. So when you get stuck on, right, when there's a lot of anger, fear, hyperactivity, that's the fight or flight mode. And it's stuck on off, that's called the freeze mode, okay, where there's, we feel depressed, a lot of lethargy, we can't get going, and so on. So how does fight, flight, or freeze look like? All right. So fight responses may include responses such as acting out, behaving aggressively, being defiant, hyperactive, very argumentative, a lot of screaming and yelling. Flight responses, self-isolation, we may isolate ourselves, we may withdraw. Fleeing the classroom, very common amongst children. Okay, I work with a lot of school cases. School refers those cases to us. So sometimes I have teachers giving me feedback like, oh, he always walk out of the classroom. He doesn't ask for permission. Okay, that also could be a flight response to stress. Skipping class, daydreaming. A lot of avoidance, especially for children or bullying. Usually they tell their mummies and daddies, I don't want to go to school. Okay, so that is a flight. Flight means run away, right? They want to avoid going to school because they want to avoid the perpetrator of their bully. Okay, but a lot of parents, they do not understand why you don't want to go to school. They thought their children are being naughty. But the fact is, if we actually look deeper, okay, they are actually avoiding the threat that is in school. They may hide or wander. They become very disengaged. Okay, in school, teachers may find it very hard to engage them. Okay, freeze mode. They may exhibit numbness, refusing to answer, giving a blank look. Okay, feeling unable to move or act. This is very common in children. Sometimes the teachers ask them question. Okay, can you answer this? Then they look, or they freeze. okay, when they hear something that feels very similar, okay, to their traumatic experience, especially for kids who have been, abused by their, adults before, who have experienced interpersonal trauma. So what may be some of the trauma triggers? So trauma trigger is anything, okay, that reminds a person of his or her previous traumatic experience. So that is what I was talking about earlier. So it's not limited to what I've put it here, but these are some examples, common examples: being let down, being alone or feeling lonely, loud noises, being touched. They can't take humor or jokes very well. Sometimes it can trigger them. Being teased or asked questions. I just want to, specific time of year or day. Okay, I read this article, I think 2 years ago. There was this lady, okay, she's working in Singapore. She was previously one of the survivors of the 9/11 incident. So following that, she actually, a couple of years later, she moved to Singapore to work. So the Straits Times actually interviewed her. So she shared about her experience. So what happened to her was she was one of the survivors who actually evacuated. I can't remember, was it World Trade Center or the Twin Tower? So she managed to evacuate, but following weeks and months after that incident has happened, she kept having a lot of flashbacks, nightmares. She couldn't work. She was, I think, out of job for a period of time. So she sought help. Okay, she was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. She went for therapy. She recovered. So she came to Singapore. Even she moved from the US to Singapore. Every year on the 11th of September, she will still have a lot of feelings of fear. She may have, she got nightmares and all that, and her friends or family members will actually call her to ensure that she feels okay. So this is what I mean by specific time of or time of year or the day, okay, can be triggers. Police officers. How do you think police officers can be a source of potential trigger? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Some children I've worked with, they shared about, they actually witnessed their own parents being taken away by the police. They come and then they have usually single parent family, so the police came, handcuffed their parent and then being let off. And then the children are left wondering, oh, my only caregiver, my attachment figure has been let off, I've been taken away, what's going to happen to me? So sometimes police officers, okay, can be a source of trauma trigger for some of these children. Okay, arguments, seeing people yelling, being in a large group of people, and so on. All right. Okay, so this is the tip of the iceberg, right? For those of you who have watched the Titanic, you remember the scene, there were two sailors who spotted a tip of the iceberg from afar. Then what they did not realize that the iceberg is actually bigger than what they are seeing, right? Okay, so that's how big an iceberg can be. So I would like to use the analogy of the iceberg. Okay, so what we are seeing, okay, like sometimes when we work with, for those of us who work with adults, what we are seeing, like disinterest, being rude, swearing, not showing up, being argumentative. Okay, these are the behaviors that we tend to see. Remember what we don't know about the trauma, but what we can see are their trauma responses. So these are examples of trauma responses. But actually beyond that tip of the iceberg, these are the things that they may have gone through that we may not know. This is the invisible suitcase I was talking about. So for children, okay, very often we see them, talking back, whining, lying, not listening, throwing tantrums and all that. So these are the behavior, the words and actions. But what I want to point out is that it's really important for us, okay, to be able to look beyond the tip of the iceberg and think about, are these what they're feeling, okay? And then are they feeling, do they actually need more attention? Are they frustrated because they cannot do their schoolwork well? Do they feel understood? Are they being valued? Are they hungry? Are they feeling lonely, tired, safe? So these are just possibilities that these children may be experiencing. So it's very important to be able to think about, what is the function of the child's behavior rather than labeling the child, all right? Now, what are the factors that can increase impact? Early occurrence, okay, remember if trauma has taken place during childhood, okay, because they do not have the capacity and emotional maturity to make sense of what has happened to them, okay, they can increase the impact of trauma. Being silenced or not believed, This happens very frequently when children disclose things, scary things that happen to them, to their parents. Okay, I have this child who told mommy that, the stepfather touched her. Mommy said that, keep quiet, don't tell anybody about it, because mom was afraid of going through another breakdown in family, right? Okay. Blaming or shaming are hallmark themes of trauma, because very often we have adults telling children, if you did not misbehave, mommy and daddy wouldn't have punished you. If you have put on more clothing, nobody would have touched you, that kind of thing. So this is what blaming and shaming entails. Okay, when the perpetrator is trusted caregiver, especially when the perpetrator are their own parents, teachers, coaches, their mentors. Okay, very often we read in the newspaper, especially in cases involving sexual abuse. Okay, it usually involves a perpetrator who tries to groom them, somebody that the child trusts and believes them. So when that happens, when the perpetrator trusts somebody that the child trusts, it throws the child off balance, and the child will feel like, I don't know who is safe, who is dangerous. So this is what we mean by, the psychological responses of trauma, whereby they no longer know what is safe and what is dangerous. Okay, now we're going to talk about the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, the ACE study. Has anyone heard of or read about the ACE study? Great, yes. So the ACE study, okay, it's one of the largest health risk study that established the relationship between trauma exposure when young and physical and mental health later in life. Right, so researchers surveyed more than 17,000 participants, okay, on their history of adverse childhood experiences. So the ACE study uses the ACE score. So the study participants are supposed to answer this ACE test. So the ACE study uses the ACE score, which is a count on the total number of adverse childhood experiences, in order to assess and determine the amount of stress that they have experienced during childhood. Okay, so for the purpose of the study, they have actually categorized all these situations, experiences into 3 categories under abuse: physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, physical, emotional neglect, as well as household challenges and dysfunction, such as having a family member with mental illness, a family member being incarcerated, mother being treated violently, or known as spousal abuse, substance abuse such as alcoholism or drugs abuse, or divorce and separation. Okay, so what the studies have found is that almost 2/3 of the participants reported experiencing at least one adverse childhood experiences, and 1 in 5 reported 3 or more adverse childhood experiences. So the short and long-term outcomes of experiencing these adverse childhood experiences included a multitude of health and social problems. And as the number of adverse childhood experiences increases, okay, the impact, the risk for health problems also increased in a strong and graded fashion. All right, and then with it comes with a direct impact on their mortality and longevity as well. Okay, and some of these participants of the study, in order to deal with the stress that comes from their trauma, okay, they adopt health risky behaviors such as taking drugs, drinking alcohol excessively, smoking, all right, or self-harm. So with the adoption of all these risky health behaviors, naturally they will develop severe medical conditions such as heart diseases, lung diseases, liver disease, and so on. Okay. So this is the ACE pyramid, which is a conceptual model which illustrates how adverse childhood experiences influence health and well-being throughout the lifespan. So in order to illustrate this pyramid, all right, I would like to share the story of John. So John was born into a household, but the time John was born, okay, his father, okay, was incarcerated, okay, went to prison for drug offenses. So because mom was not working, so there were financial problems at home. So in order to cope with the financial problems, she was so stressed, she turned to drinking alcohol. So because of her excessive drinking, she was not able to take care of John and his 2 siblings. So that resulted in emotional and physical neglect, right? The mother drunk, cannot take care. All right, so how many ACEs present already? Incarcerated parent, mother drinking alcohol, and then emotional and physical neglect. So 4 adverse childhood experiences present. And because of these adverse childhood experiences, okay, it has led to disrupted brain development in John. Because of the disrupted development in his brain, that led to an impairment in his social, emotional, and cognitive functioning, which means that he was not able to do well in school. And because he was not able to do well in school, he did not manage to complete his education. Because he did not complete his education, what happens? He isn't able to use education as a form of social leveler for him, right? So he has problems looking for jobs. So he was in and out of jobs, okay? Then he became stressed as well, okay? So in stress, want to cope with his stress, he also turned to drinking alcohol. So adoption of health risk behavior. Alcoholism is bad for our health, right? So because of excessive drinking, he developed liver disease and also depression, okay? And because of the liver disease, this led to his early death. So how prevalent is trauma amongst children in Singapore? So this is the latest statistics taken from Ministry of Social and Family Development on the number of child protection cases that were being investigated by Child Protection Services. So as you can see, last year, 2020, they investigated a total of 1,300 cases, which is about 20% increase as compared to 2019. And if you notice, it happens to be the highest number of cases investigated as compared to almost a decade. But I also like to point out the higher number of cases investigated is also partially due to rigorous screening tools that were being introduced to schools, to social service agencies. So it was picked up very easily, okay? Okay, so this was taken from Straits Times in March this year. So KK Hospital has also reported, a 30% increase in child trauma referrals. Okay, I think highest since 2017. Okay, so a similar A study was also done in Singapore. Then the findings of the study was actually released last year. Okay, so the A study done in Singapore also supported the A study that was first done in the US, which I shared with all of you earlier on. So similarly, they also found that about 2 in 3 people have reported experiencing some form of trauma in the past. 2 in 3 reported at least experiencing one adverse childhood experience. So the study has found that those who had experienced between 1 to 2 ACEs were more likely to be associated with these mental health conditions, major depressive disorder, bipolar, OCD, and suicidality. Those who have reported experiencing 3 or more ACEs were actually more likely to be experiencing all of these mental health disorders. So what does this tell us? This tells us that there is a strong correlation between traumatic events and mental health disorders later in life. So what can we do about this? Okay, so which is right now I'm going to talk about trauma-informed care. Okay, understand what is trauma-informed practice or approach. What are the 6 core principles of trauma-informed practice, and how can we integrate a model or apply these principles into our environment and interpersonal context? Okay. This is a video on empathy. I don't think I have time to show this, okay? I'll just carry on. So what this video is essentially talking about is the importance of empathy, all right? Empathy is feeling with people. And I have people asking me, how do we show empathy? Okay, we show empathy by acknowledging other people's perspective taking, be able to see the perspective of others and acknowledging that their perspective is the truth, okay? Recognizing emotions and communicating emotions, okay, to that person, and being non-judgmental in our interaction with other people. So in trauma-informed practice, the underlying question that we need to ask is, what happened to you, instead of asking the question, what's wrong with you? I think it's very common in our society, especially in Asian culture. Everything is, we take a very blaming approach, right? Even though I'm a therapist in clinical practice for many years, very often, even with my children, I will tend to ask, what's wrong with you? Why you like this? Why you like that? Okay? So I think it's important that we need to think about what is the function of that behavior? Why is the child behaving like this? Why is this person behaving like this? To find out what is exactly happening rather than jump to conclusions. And in trauma-informed care, we view their behaviors as their adaptations to traumatic events. What does that mean? It simply means that they are trying to, cope with, their experience of the trauma. And in trauma-informed care, we believe that healing happens in relationships, because studies have shown that supportive, positive, and nurturing relationships, okay, are actually key to trauma recovery. So when we talk about trauma, we talk about resilience as well, because resilience is the ability to be able to bounce back from adversities. It's also the ability to be able to adapt to our stress. So what are some ways to build resilience? I just want to highlight the first 2 points. Healthy relationships with competent, caring, supportive adults, and connections with positive role models or mentors. These are the foundations and basis for building resilience, and with that, the rest will come their way. Okay, so when there is a healthy relationship and when there's connection with somebody that's positive, that is when you start teaching them coping skills and social emotional skills, and then they will feel like there's a mastery, a sense of mastery over their lives. Okay, they'll have a sense of control over their lives. So what exactly is trauma-informed care? Trauma-informed care is very strength-based, because when we talk about resilience, we are talking about, we don't look at their weaknesses, we don't look at their deficits, we want to look at their strengths, what are they good at? So that makes trauma-informed care an excellent approach, okay, in working with somebody, okay, who have experienced trauma. Even anyone who has not experienced trauma, it's always good practice, okay, to use a strength-based approach, okay, to work with them. So to break it down further, trauma-informed care does no harm. All right, it understands the effects of that toxic stress can have on our brain and body. Okay, it's a way of being. It's an attitude. Okay, trauma-informed care is not professional therapy or treatment. There are other treatments for trauma. It is neither a silver bullet solution nor is it a fixed checklist. So it's not about, okay, I've done this, I've done that. It's really how do we interact, have positive interaction with others. So the 6 core principles of trauma-informed practice, it's about safety, not only physical safety, but emotional safety. How do we ensure that when we interact with kids or the adults, that they feel safe when they're with us? Okay, we're also sensitive to cultural diversity. Okay, in trauma-informed care, I think one of the key principles that I really like is collaboration. Okay, do we work with people? Do we work with people or do we work for people? It's important to work with people, okay? And then to offer them choices. This is really important, when working with children, like giving them choices rather than telling them, what to do. That is very top-down. We don't want to do top-down, we want to do same level. And then how do we ensure that there's trustworthiness and, transparency, okay? Do we lay the facts down and talk? Are we open, all right? Okay, so let me just explain a little bit further. Okay, so some gestures that can help incorporating those principles. Okay, providing comfort and safety. I don't know what to say to you right now, but I'll be here with you. Because very often when we have somebody coming to us with a problem, very often we have good intentions. We want to help them solve their problems, right? So we tell them, okay, you should do this, you do that. But sometimes what these people really need is our presence and really to be with them and stay with them. All right. And then also to listen to them, tell me how things are going. And then collaborate. Let's say if you have children or working with children, okay, if you have a child who, let's say, failed their exams, not doing well, instead of, telling the child, yeah, you should have studied more lah. Why? Because you never revise your work. So we want to collaborate with them. Let's work together, come up with a plan to help you so that, you may, do better in the next exam. So we want to inspire them. How can we make things better? Because very often, especially people who have been impacted by trauma before, they tend to have a very negative outlook in life. What we want to do is inspire them and let them know that things can be better, right? And then we also want to measure, their progress using a micrometer rather than a yardstick, right? Every effort counts, okay? And we want to focus on efforts and not on outcomes. So because trauma-informed care is about building relationships, okay, it's adopting attitudes of compassion and respect, because positive experiences in our relationship can help us to heal, whereas negative experiences in our relationship can make psychological and emotional problems worse. So when we build relationship and connectedness, instead, when somebody acts like this, withdrawn, reacts with a lot of anger, depressed, passive, hopeless, helpless, disrespectful, we may be very tempted to respond like this, right? But what if we demonstrate, these the respect, values of respect, patience, really listening to them, empathy, okay, and, understanding. So what does it take to be trauma-informed? Mindset shift, if you remember. We want to ask the question, what happened to you instead of what's wrong with you, okay? Trauma-informed care is about providing constant attention and care and adopting attitudes of compassion and respect and really being authentic. Self-awareness, okay, when we're trauma-informed, we're aware of how we interact with others, how we respond to somebody. We will ask ourselves, okay, I spoke to, let's say if I'm a teacher, I spoke to my student like this, how would my student have felt? Let me share one quick example. There was this student that was referred to me. So what happened was he's 14, so he fell asleep in class. So what the teacher did was she actually walked up to his desk and then knocked on his desk really hard. So he got up, he reacted, he actually pushed the table, and the teacher felt threatened. And of course, the school actually put him on the discipline committee and so on. But after following that, when we tried to process the incident, so I had a word with the teacher. So I asked, when I checked in with the teacher, I asked what could she have done differently, to avoid, such a reaction. So after, speaking with her and all that and coaching her, so she said probably she would have let him continue to sleep, and at the end of the lesson, instead, check in on him and let him know, I noticed you were sleeping during my lesson earlier. Did something happen last night? You did not sleep well, right? And have one-on-one time with him to talk about what has happened. So can you see the difference between what's wrong with you and what happened? So seeking to find out what happened before really responding to the child's misbehavior can have make a world of difference. So there are basically three key things to remember when practicing trauma-informed care. Recognize that change happens very slowly, and know that sometimes we may never see the outcome of our efforts. Okay. However, trust that connection, relationship building, and our simple compassionate gestures are actually really important elements in the trauma-informed approach. Okay, I'll just share this diagram with you. So essentially, okay, what all of you are doing today, okay, what I'm doing today is sharing knowledge and understanding so that all of us will know how to integrate and model trauma-informed values, actions, and systems. Okay, we also want to disrupt the cycle to reduce the risk of child exposure to trauma through prevention and early intervention. Okay, we want to enhance protective factors. Protective factors are factors that will lead us to reduce, okay, the likelihood of developing mental health issues, right? To help people bounce back and reduce risk for poor health outcomes. We were talking about the A study earlier. Okay, so we want to actually enhance protective factors to reduce the poor physical and mental health outcomes later in life. And then we want to integrate accessible and effective supports that can foster healing and recovery. When all these are being put in, only then we are able to build a connected, healthy, and resilient community. So all of us have a part to play. It all compounds, okay? All right, that has brought me to the end of my sharing today. Okay, and these are the help and resources that you may find helpful or you can turn to. Okay, yep. All right, do you all have any questions? Okay, if not, thank you so much for your participation and your attention throughout my sharing today. Thank you.